Daf Nun Vav Amid Aleph, about 8 lines into the page. So what the Gemara is dealing with, this is completely agavdik. This is not the sugya that we started, but we got into it. The sugya got into about a klal and a prat that are not in the same parsha. But bekitzer, what the sugya ended up is like this: all chatos are shechted in the north. We basically have 3 psukim for this. The need for 3 psukim is because the pasuk says by the sa'ir's chatas, the nasi's chatas. If the nasi sins, he has to bring a chatas. It says oisai tishachat b'makom shetishchat ha'oila. Only that one is shechted in the north. The problem is that's not true. Oisai implies that dafka that one. That's not true. All chatos are shechted in the north. So the question is, what is oisai coming to be memayit? So we're going to have like 5 options. Option number 1 we did yesterday, which is that maybe it's coming to memayit Nachshon ben Aminadav's chatas. The Nachshon ben Aminadav brought a chatas by the inauguration, that you might think that has to be injected in the north, kamash or not. And the Gemara rejected that because, first of all, the Gemara says it wasn't really a chatas. I mean, they call it a chatas, but it's not a chatas because it wasn't for a sin offering, so it doesn't have to be shechted in the north. So the Gemara says, okay, so what is oisai coming to be mayit? Elo oisai ton safon ve'in hashoichet omid oimid b'tzafon. You know what it means is? Oisai means that dafka the animal has to be in the north. But the kohen who's shechting it does not have to be in the north, or any person who's shechting does not have to be in the north. Meaning, the animal can be situated in the north on the border, and I can stick my hand in and shecht it. So oisaita and safan dafka, the animal has to be in the north, but the person who's the sheichit does not have to be in the north. Okay, very good. Says the Gemara, that's true, but the problem is we have a different source for that. Midir Rav Achia nafka. We learned that out from the teaching of Rav Achia. The Tanya, Rav Achia oimer. Rav Achia says, regarding the oila, v'shachar eisoya yerech hamizbeach tzafayna, matam aloymar lefisha metzinu b'mekabel she'oymid b'tzafan u'mekabel b'tzafan. The pasuk says that he stands near the oila when he shechs it. So says Rav Chia, what do I need this for? So says Rav Chia, I'll tell you why. Because when it comes to be the mekabel of the dam, the kabbalas hadam has to be by kachim kachim has to be in the north, and so does the kohen who's being mekabel the dam. Meaning you cannot stand in the south and stick your hands in. You have to actually be there. And if you're standing in the south and you're sticking your hands into the north, it's puzzle. So that's true by the mekabel. So says Rav Achia, Yochel af zakein. You might think that it's true by the chatas, by the shchita as well. Tamaloymar oisai. It says oisai. This is referring to the shchita of the oila. It says oisai. Oisai b'tzafin. V'le'ashachet tzarich liyos. I'm b'tzafin. And the shaycha does not have to be in the north. So the problem is, you're telling me that the chatas is the nasi's chatas says oisai to exclude that the kohen does not have to be standing in the north. He could stick his hands in. The problem is Rav Achia already learned that out from the oila. Okay, so reject that. So it says the Gemara. Okay, a third option. Elo oisai b'tzafin ve'ein ben oif b'tzafin. The third option is that the shchita has to be done in the north, but malikas ha'oif does not need to be performed in the north. Meaning, you could do malikas ha'oif, the malika could be done anywhere, in the north or the south. That's what oisai is kemayit. After the shchita of the chatas has to be done in the north, but the malika of the chatas does not have to be done in the north. Says the Gemara, why would I think it has to be done in the north? So you might think lacy b'kav chaymer b'ben sayin. I'll make a kav chaymer. Uma ben sayin when it comes to shchita. Shaloi kav lekoyin. Does a kohen have to be the sheichet? No. A Yisrael could be the sheichet, and yet it has to be done in the north. Malika, which must be done by a kohen, kav chaymer needs to be done in the north. Kamashmalan, no. Oisai b'tzafin. Vein malikas oif b'tzafin. Ben oif shekav lekoyin din shekiv b'tzafin. Oh, so I have a pasuk to exclude malika, and the havamina is that you might think a kav chaymer from the shchita. If the shchita has to be done in the north, kav chaymer, the malika has to be done in the north. Kamash malan, no, and it would be learned out from a kav chaymer. Says the Gemara, mala ben oif shekin kav kli. Yeah, but you can't compare the two. You're going to say, it's a kav chaymer. What's more chamer? The malika. The malika is more chamer because it requires a kohen. The shchita is more kal, and if the shchita has to be done in the north, kav chaymer, the chamer one, the malika has to be done in the north. I don't know if malika is more chamer, because I'll tell you why. The shchita at least needs a kli. You need a knife. It's a kli shares. The malika is your nail. It's not a kli. So your whole presumption that the malika is more chamer, lav dafka. Says the Gemara, ma'ala ben oish kein lo yikav kli. So reject that too. Says the Gemara, okay, option number 4. The shchita b'chatas has to be done in the north, but the carbon pesach does not have to be shechted in the north. Now this is a chiddush. Why would I think the carbon pesach has to be shecht in the north? The carbon pesach is kachikalim. Kachikalim does not have to be shecht in the north. Says the Gemara, I have a havamina. You might think the pesach has to be shecht in the north. It's a pella. So says the Gemara, I'll tell you why. Pesach. No, the Gemara. Okay, the Gemara is going to reject it for other reasons. The Gemara says, first of all, what's the havamina? We'll get to, but also the source that a carbon pesach does not have to be shechted from the north is not from this. There's a different source. Pesach midir v'Elazar ben Yaakov nafka. That's learned out from Elazar ben Yaakov. The Tanya of Elazar ben Yaakov Omer. Yachli Pesach toin safin. Elazar ben Yaakov Mamash speaks this out. You might think the carbon pesach has to be shechted in the north. And dinu, I'll make the following kavachomer. Why would I think the carbon pesach have to be shechted in the north? Kachi koshim have to be in the north, not kachi kalim. Carbon pesach is kachi kalim. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. It's a kavachomer. Ma oila shalei kavali zman b'shchitas kavali tzafin Pesach kavali zman l'shchitas in addition kavali tzafin. I'll tell you why. Carbon Pesach is more chamer than other karbanos. Why? It's the only one that has to be brought at a certain time. You don't have to bring an oil at a certain time. You don't have to bring a chatzis at a certain time. Carbon Pesach is erev Pesach from one zman to the next. It's very limited. So because it has a specific zman, maybe it has to be shecht in the north because you'd learned it out compared to an oila. This is more chamer than an oila, right? The oila is more kal, and this is more chamer. So if an oila, which does not have to be shechted at a specific time, must be in the north, kal v'chaymer the Pesach. So the Pesach is more chamer than an oila. Malo oila shkin kolol. Now you can't compare the two. Oila is entirely burnt on the mizbeach. I think an oila is more chamer. Maybe that's why an oila has to be shechted in the north because it's entirely burnt. Whereas okay, mechatas. Okay, make the same drasha from achatas. Achatas has to be in the north, and it doesn't have a specific time. The carbon pesach, which has a specific time, kavachomer. The Gemara says, "Malachatas shechim mechaperes al chayv krisos." Achatas is more chomer. Maybe achatas has to be in the north because it's mechaper and chayv kores. Carbon pesach's not mechaper or anything. Whereas okay, asham is the same thing. It has to be in the north. Does not have a specific time, and it's not mechaper for chayv krisos. It's mechaper for averis, but not chayv krisos. Ma'asham. But Malo Asham, and this is the knockout punch. Kachikachim. They're all kachikachim. Oila, Chatas, Asham, they're all kachikachim. That's supposed to be in the north. Pesach is a kachikalim. It's like a shlomim. Kachikalim doesn't have to be in the north. And the Gemara says, Mekulunamim, Mishakin kachikachim. So it's a rejection. So we're back to the original point. What do I do with the word oisai that by the nasi's chatas? So says the Gemara, go back to the second mahalach. Let's go back to the approach that we had earlier in today's daf. Let's go with that approach. That oisai is b'tzafain. The word, the oisai by the nasi's chatas is telling me dafka the animal has to be the tzafain, but not the shaychit. We learned that out from Rabbi. I'll say this as we'll see instead. Didn't Rabbi mamash have the exact same drasha by the oila? The answer is no. Rabbi drasha was telling me be'ikr, not that by the oila that the shaychit doesn't have to be in the north, but rather Rabbi Chia's main drasha was to tell me that the mekabel doesn't have to be by the north. Meaning we thought the way we read Rabbi Chia earlier was, I know the mekabel of the dam has to be in the north. I know that. His drasha was, although the mekabel has to be in the north, the shaychit does not. It's not true. His ikar drasha was to tell me the mekabel has to be in the north. That's his ikar drasha. The shaychit was not his main point. The ikar point was the mekabel has to be in the north, and therefore, so you have the mekabel. You don't have a source really for the shaychit yet. This is for the shaychit, that the shaychit does not have to be in the north. The Gemara says, "Lo'elam kan minikara b'tzafin, ois b'tzafin, a shaychit b'tzafin." Udekakashum the Rav Chia nafka. If you're going to say, isn't that Rav Chia's drasha? No, the Rav Chia lav the mute shaychit b'tzafin udasa. The ikar drasha of Rav Chia was not to be mamayit the shaychit in the north. That's from our drasha. Rather, elahachi kamar ein hashaychit b'tzafin makal b'tzafin. The ikar drasha of Rav Chia is as follows. You have the pasuk over here that says the shaychit has to be, the shaychit does not have to be in the north. His drasha is to say, but the makabel does. Meaning, we thought makabel was from a different drasha. No, it's from Rabbi Chia. So it says the Gemara, I thought makabel being in the north was from a different drasha. Now we didn't quote it today's daf, we quoted in Tzvachim. I thought makabel milokach vilokach nafka is from the extra vav. The answer is lokach vilokach le'mashmal. Rabbi Chia doesn't darshan that way. So he doesn't have, meaning, we thought we had already the source that the makabel has to be in the north. So his drasha was to say the shaychit does not. That's not true. He didn't have the shaychit, the makabel has to be in the north, and that was his drasha. Okay. End of that discussion. New topic. Back to actually the topic we had yesterday, which is that if someone is oisik in the preparation of a mincha that turns into a chametz, you're over a lav. And we talked that there's a lav for the baking, there's a lav for the kneading, and there's a lav for the shaping of it. Rav Papa is a chiddush. Every time a person bakes challah, loy kashtayim, you're actually malka twice. Meaning, if I take chametz and I bake it, I'm over 2 lashes. Why? One for baking, and also achas al richasai, the achas al fiyasai. One for baking, one for shaping. Apparently, every time you bake, that's the finishing touches on shaping the bread. So, like you think of shaping as just like with your hands, whatever, making braiding. No. The end of the shaping process is putting it in the oven. So every time you bake, you're going to be over twice. One for baking and one for shaping. Okay, fine. Okay, it's fine. It's a point. Here's the kasha though. Didn't we say yesterday the whole point of the drasha was that baking is one of the steps and you're over 1 lav, so to every step that you do, you're over 1 lav? Didn't we kind of make it sound like yesterday that baking is 1 lav, not 2? Now you're telling me every time you bake, you're over 2 lavs, one for baking and one for shaping. Says the Gemara, didn't we say yesterday, baking is unique, that it's 1 act, and you're over 1 lav. So how could you tell me every time you bake, you're over 2 lavs? I thought we said you're over only 1 lav. It says, loy kasha. Ha de'arech hu va'afahu. The brisa that said that you're only over 1 lav, it's so detailed semantics. It's basically like this: if I shape the dough and then bake it, I'm only over 1 lav for the baking because I did the shaping earlier. If, however, you shape the dough and then I bake it, then I'm over 2 lavs. 1 for baking and 1 for the end of the shaping process. You'll be over for shaping, and so will I. So it's very meaning. So every time you bake it, you're going to get 2 sets of lashes. Now, if I did the shaping and the baking, then the baking is going to be for one, and the shaping is going to be for the other, because that end of the shaping process, which is included in the baking, is not significant compared to what I did previously. So I'll get 1 for the baking and 1 for the shaping.
The shaping is irrelevant to the baking.
Correct.
So why do you get 2?
No, so that's the point. If I do the full shape and the bake, shape and bake, I'll be over 2 lavs, 1 for the shaping, comma, and 1 for the baking. When the brisa said before, every time you bake, you're over 2, that's if I didn't shape it. Meaning, let's say you shaped it. So you're going to get lashes for shaping. Then you hand it to me, and I put it in the oven. I pick it up and put it in the oven. They used to stick it against the wall of the oven, whatever, stick it against the wall of it. I'm going to be over 2. 1 for the baking, and 1 for that little bit of shaping that's included in the end of the process. So
why is he getting a lot for shaping? You're doing the shaping.
To be fair, I didn't see that inside, so I'll take that back. Whether you also get a lot for shaping, I'm not sure. I assumed such because you're doing the majority of it, but I actually could be wrong about that. But mitzad the baker, if the baker shapes it also, he'll be over 2 lavs, but 1 for the shaping, 1 for the baking. But if I just bake it, I'll be over 2 within the baking itself. Again, it's semantics because Adam's 100% right. You're never really over 2. There's always the baking and the shaping is separate. It's just whether you're chayiv for the little bit of the shape of the baking the shaping that's included in the baking or the entire shaping before. It's very much semantics. Okay, Tana Rabbanan. Okay, so here's the interesting point. You have over here an interesting process. Let's say you're the baker, yeah? You add the water and you let it sit for an hour. It's now chametz. So you're over a lav. You hand it to me, I braid it, I knead it, I'm over a lav. I hand it to Mr. Lord, he braids it, over a lav. Adam bakes it, over lav. Even though, 2 actually, we're over so many lavim, even though we're all dealing with the same chametz, right? It's not like, usually you're like programmed to think that like once the Avera is done, it's done. It's not true. This is like steps. So the Gemara is going to talk about something else that's similar, not exactly, but it has the same process. The Gemara says like this, Tana Rabbanan. Okay, the rule of the Bechar is as follows. When you have a Bechar Behema, you give it to a Kayin. Now if it's Tamim, meaning if it's Roi to be brought as a carbon, then the Kayin brings it as a carbon and he eats part of the meat. Let's say it has a blemish. If it has a blemish, he keeps it and he eats it his own. Now he has certain halachas. He's not allowed to degrade it in certain ways, but he gets to keep it. Now, one of the major no-nos is for a kohen to instill a mum into the behema. Meaning, if you find out that the kohen, because think about it, the kohen, first of all, it's an issa deraisa. Also, it's incredibly dishonest. the kohen has a motivation to do this, because if the kohen, think about it, if it's a full carbon, he gets a little piece of the meat, but if it's a mum, he gets to keep the whole thing. So there's a very high level of scrutiny anytime the kohen has to do something. So here's the situation. The kohen goes to the vet, and he says, my cow has a very high fever. It's a sakana mamish. Okay, so here's the thing. The only way to really get this to be better is to bloodlet. Now, bloodletting is not necessarily a mum fully. It depends where you do it. If you do it, let's say, on the arm of the animal. Arms? They have arms. Arm of the animal, not really legs. They should have 4 legs. Okay, my bad. I knew it sounded weird. If you do it on the leg of the animal, so the blood will come out, it'll heal. Now, it's a temporary mum, but it'll heal and you'll be able to bring as a carbon. You do it on its eye, you do it on a part of the top of the ear, by the cartilage, it's not gonna come back. So obviously, the shaila is basically like this. He definitely cannot puncture it to give it a mum that is, well, we'll see. Pashtus, that's not going to be okay. The question is, what could he do? Let's lay it like that. What can this kohen do? And by the way, can he do anything? Because one could argue, we'd rather let the animal die and trust that he won't, because even if Yutaka hold that he could make the bloodletting on the leg, we may not trust the kohen, and it's not even his fault. Think about how much money you're talking about, thousands and thousands of dollars. If he gets to, if there's a mum, it's like a car. You understand? So it could be that we would rather say let the animal die. So let's see. There's 4 basic opinions. Taner Rabbanan bechar she'ach zeidam. You have a bechar that has a high fever, and the only way to fix it is, she'ach zeidam is actually, it's too much blood. Whatever it is. It's too much concentrated blood cells. You got to let the blood out. So, makizin oisei esadam, the Tanakama, this is Rameir Shita is that you're allowed to bloodlet it. B'makom she'ein oisei b'mum. You're allowed to bloodlet it. Let me ask you, Kasha, why are you allowed to bloodlet it? It's a mum. It's a temporary mum, but it's a mum. So why is this allowed? So Rameir Shita is, actually we'll get to Rameir in a second. Rameir holds that making a temporary blemish is not really aser. Yeah, he holds that a temporary blemish is not aser, and therefore you're allowed to make a temporary blemish. But you're not allowed to make a permanent blemish. So if you ask Rameir, what could I do? He would say, lance the animal on the leg, but not in the eye. Okay, good. Comes the Chachamim, and they have a tremendous chiddush. Chachamim say, the Chachamim say, you know what, you could actually make a full mum. Why? The Chachamim shita is, this animal has a fever already. It's already a bal mum. Once it's already a mum, unlike the bread, where you could have like multiple steps, once it's a mum, it's already a mum. The isser of instilling a mum does not apply on an animal that already has a mum. Its mum is the fact that it's dying. And therefore, once the animal already has the mum, the blemish being that it has 104 fever, whatever it is, it's actually not so high for a cow, but it has a very high fever, so then it already has a mum, then the isurim do not apply. Now, what you're not allowed to do, you're not allowed to eat it based on that mum. Meaning, let's say the kohen goes to the chachamim, and the chachamim say, poke in the eye. You could poke in the eye. If that's will do the blood, poke in the eye. Blood comes out. Now, it has a mum already. Can't be burned as a carbon. I told you before, when it has a mum, the kohen gets to eat it. Chachamim say, no, can't do that, because that's bad optics. See what you got to do. You got to let it sit in the backyard, give it a few months, it'll get another blemish, and then you could eat it. But technically, there's no isser of instilling a mum because it already has a mum. That's the chachamim shita, which is unlike the bread. So Rameir only allows a temporary mum. The chachamim allow even a permanent mum. Comes Rav Shimon, go to the next page. Rav Shimon Rav Shimon says, not only could you do a permanent mum, you could eat it. Meaning, the Rav Shimon holds like the chachamim, but like ultra, like extra. He holds like the chachamim that you're allowed to mamish do a full mum even in the eye, and then you could eat it based on this. We're not even worried about optics. And then you have the opposite shita, which is Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says, no, afilu meis ein makizin le'zadam. Even if it'll die based on the fever, you're not allowed to bloodlet it. Meaning, Rav Yehuda's shita is, we do not say that it already has a mum, and no, it's also legamri, and we would rather let it die than trust you. Meaning, Rabbi Yehuda would technically allow, Rashi explains, Rabbi Yehuda would technically allow a temporary mum, but we don't trust that you'll do a temporary, not permanent, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda holds the whole thing's aser. So you basically have four shitas. You have Rabbi Yehuda, which is mamash the whole thing's aser, let it die. You have Rav Shimon that says you could do a permanent mum and eat it. You have the Chacham that say you could do a permanent mum, but optics, you can't eat it until it gets another mum, and then Rav Meir, only a temporary mum. So the Gemara speaks it out. Omer Rav, and again, the Chachamim shita is based on the premise that the high fever is a mum, and once it already has a mum, the isser of instilling a mum doesn't apply. Because you can't do a mum on a mum. Rav Chia bar Abba, Rav Yochanan, Hakol Moedim. Now Rav Chia bar Abba says, Rav Chia bar Abba's point is, don't use this machlokes, this concept to apply to other cases. Because I'll be honest with you, if you took the Chachamim shita, that once something has a mum, it already has a mum, you can't mum it again. I would say the same thing about the bread. Once it's chametz, you can't chametz it again. That's not the shita. So says the Gemara, Hakol moedim mechametz amar chametz. In our discussion of bread, if I made it chametz and then you baked it, even though it's already chametz, everyone agrees shuchayiv. Everyone agrees you're ever allowed, as the Mishnah said, D'chsiv lo yseaseh chametz, lo yseafeh chametz. Meaning, don't say that this machlokes can be applied to here. It does not. Secondly, misaris acha misaris. There's an isser of castration of an animal, which, by the way, which is why when I mentioned before a vet, Jews are not Orthodox Jews are not generally vets. I knew one vet, but she wasn't very from. It's basically, I think I googled it once. It's like 85% of the job is spaying and neutering animals. Like that's like the majority of what they do, and that's mamish and issa deraisa. So, and that's why from Jew to be a vet is not really an option. So, let's say you have one person who castrates the animal, and the other person, for some reason, mutilates it further, mutilates the genitals further. The halacha is chayiv. The second person's chayiv, meaning we don't say once it's already mutilated, once it's already castrated. No. Every time you mutilate that part of the body further, more isurim. D'chsiv umoch v'katus v'natuk v'charus. The pasuk says that those organs are squeezed, crushed, detached, or cut. Why does the pasuk have to mention all that? The answer is, even if it's, let's say, crushed and then you detach it, you're over allowed. Good. So what's the whole machlokes by the Baal Mum? It doesn't apply to the bread, and it doesn't apply to castration. So what does it apply to? The whole machlokes is, dafka in the case of a bechar, is there a lav for instilling a mum on a Baal Mum? Rameir savar kol mum le'yibay. Rameir says it's a problem, meaning Rameir only allowed a temporary mum, but a permanent mum, Rameir felt is a problem. Kol mum le'yibay. You're not allowed to instill a mum. Even if it has a mum, you can't do a second mum. That's Rameir Shita. Rabban and Sabri, no, Tomim Yelaratzon. Only if it's Tomim is there an Isser. If it's a mum already, it's fine. So each one has their own pasuk, and that's the fundamental machlokes, is if there's already a mum, can I still another mum? So the Gemara speaks out, Rameir Nami Yoksiv Tom Yelaratzon. What does Rameir do with Tomim? Tomim implies that it's only an Isser if it's Tomim. If it already has a mum, it's mutter. So what does Rameir do with that? Hahu Lemiute Balmum Ikara. Rameir says that pasuk, which Tam Yilaratzin implies that if it has a mum, it's mutter, that's where if it was born with a mum. Meaning, let's say an animal was born disfigured. It was born missing two legs. Then there's no isser. So if it was full and then it had a blemish, Rameir says you can't touch it. The pasuk implies that it's mutter, that's the Rabban Shita, Chum Shita. Rameir says that's talking about it was born as a mum already. Says the Gemara, the Chum don't like this. Why? If an animal is born already blemished, it's like a tree. It doesn't have a status of an animal, but chalal, if it was born deformed. So says the Gemara, Elamute psule hamikdoshim la'achar pidyonim. You know what it's referring to? The pasuk says Tam Yilaratzin, which implies that there's mutter to instill a mum if it's imperfect animal. That's not talking about a bechar. You know what that's talking about? That's talking about a carbon, psule mikdoshim, la'achar pidyonim. Let's say you have a carbon that became disqualified to be a carbon, and you redeemed it. I'm not getting into the details of how and what. Let's say Bekitza, you had a shlomim that became a puzzle for whatever reason. You transfer the money on the cash, the kiddush onto cash, and that animal now, you go back to your apartment, you take it home. The halacha is you're allowed to instill a mum in that. The isser of a mum does not apply to that case. That's what that pasuk is referring to, not a bechar. So says the Gemara, why would I think that? Kamash Malan. When that animal, when you have a carbon that is redeemed and then there's a pidyon, the halacha is you get to eat it, but there are certain things you can't do. I don't know if you remember this. You can't weigh it in public. There are certain things you can't skin it in public. There are certain things that you cannot do to that animal because of the fact that it was kaddish at one point. So you might think that because it has some restrictions, the isser of instilling a mum applies, kamash malon. It does not. Okay. Rabbanan Amri will end with this. Either Rabbanan Hoksiv Kol Mum Lo Yiaboy. What do the Rabbanan do with this pasuk, which implies it's always usher to instill a mum, even if it already has a mum? Al Mubayla the Kidatanya. That's used for the following brisa. Kol Mum Lo Yiaboy. The pasuk says you should not put any blemish on a carbon. Ein liyala shelo yehei by mum. Menayin lo sheli groyoy ayadei acherim shlei niach betza koydevei lagabi oizen. Kedei sheyavei akelavi itzlenu. Tamaloimer kol mum asher mum va'omar kol mum. Okay, so basically, what if I don't do the mum? It's like a sadist type of thing to do. I'm not doing the mum. It'll happen on its own. How do you do that? You put honey on the animal's ears, and the dog comes and attacks it. So, did you actively make the mum? No, but you were goyrim the mum. The halacha is goyrim the mum is also aser. By the way, that's the gay also for like, let's say you give it like a medication, which causes part of the animal to be affected. That would also be aser. It's a grama. A grama of a mum is also aser. That's what the pasuk is coming to explain. But if it has a mum, you could instill another mum. This iser is talking about a grama. Let's just finish up. Amar Rav Ami. Heniach sa'ar al gabi isa. If let's say, let's just do this. We talked before about how when it comes to grama of a mum is a problem. What if I do grama of chametz? Normally, when you have chametz, is you take yeast and you mix it in, and you mix the whole dough, and it grows, right? And that's you. Right? The normal way is inserting yeast into dry flour before the adding of water and then kneading, or by kneading as usual and letting the dough rise on its own. That's usually the way I do it. What if I didn't do that? I have like a matzah, and I just take yeast, put it on there, and I don't touch, and then it just in a weird way becomes chametz that way. So you didn't do it in the normal way, which is kneading and letting it sit, or putting in yeast and kneading the yeast in. This, I have like a matzah, and then I just put a block of yeast on top. So it's like a grama. It happened sort of on its own. So it says the Gemara, you're chayiv just like on Shabbos. Just like on Shabbos, if you were to put a piece of meat on the coals and not flip it over and not stoke it and not stir it, it'll be chayiv just merely placing it. So placing the yeast on the dough for the karban mincha is also going to be over a lot. Because it's similar to Shabbos. We'll end with this. Umaisa Shabbos ki agavra mimchayv. Is that chayv on Shabbos? V'amar Rabbi Chana. Didn't Rabbi Chana say, Rabbi Yochanan, heniach basar gabi gacholim? If you place a piece of meat on coals on Shabbos, hipach b'chayiv or hipach b'potter. You're only chayiv if you flip it over, if you stir it. If you just merely place it on the coals, you're not chayiv. Now stop right there. I understand the obvious question, which is, who in their right mind, you put a piece of steak on the fire on Shabbos, I would think you're definitely chayiv. Tomorrow we'll talk about the exact parameters of it. But there is a certain situation where you have to be mahapechit. So you're telling me that putting yeast on the flour is chayiv for the mincha, for making a chametz, even if you don't flip it or knead it. Like Shabbos, I thought by Shabbos you have to knead it or flip it over. The answer is Amarava. You're right. When we said you're chayiv for putting the yeast on it, you at least have to flip it over once, like Shabbos. Meaning the taka like Shabbos has to be flipped over once. It doesn't have to be done in the normal way. You need some act. So too over here, if you put the yeast on it, you're only chayiv if you top can flip it over. I will stop here.